All right, everybody, welcome back to the Be That 1% podcast. I'm your host, James Silvis, and it feels good to be back in the studio recording some of the insights that I've been really just embodying, researching, leaning into, observing since, October, which was when the last episode was released. And the podcast, again, continues to be a really cool format for me to share what's alive for me, and again, expressing gratitude for you guys being in this community and, and tuning into these episodes. I find great pleasure in creating them when they feel aligned. And now I think we're, entering season 9 almost. Yeah, almost. Yeah. And it's been really fun to continue to create and to learn and to dive deeper. And so today's episode is what makes you unstoppable in a chaotic world? A world where convenience is desirable, where tech is continuing to be autonomous and just instant. Where we don't have to work hard to get things that 10, 15, 20 years ago were really, really hard to get. And that is beautiful in some ways, but it's also adding more to the chaos, more options, more things to think about, and more information that is right, could not be right, and creating a lot of mental and emotional turmoil, if you will. And so today's conversation, I'd really like to be grounded in what are some of the habits that either you can continue to reinforce and strengthen if you're already doing them, or if you're not, begin integrating them into your lifestyle, into how you think, into how you operate, so that regardless of how chaotic the world around you, the moment may feel, you can come back to these habits to ground you, to give you the clarity needed to move forward with direction, with clarity, with precision, with intentionality, which is ultimately what slows things down and brings more of you into the moment. And so the world around us is not going to get any calmer, right? So we don't want to wait for it to do that, because it's not. Life inherently is chaos. You can't predict it. We have anticipations. We can do our best to try and understand what we think might happen. But at the end of the day, life is going to life, right? And so the most powerful habit isn't going to be doing more. It's going to be building inner systems that don't collapse when the pressure hits. And the pressure can be on every day, right? So what's going to be grounding us in those moments? And so chaos here isn't the problem. It's our fragility. It's how fragile we are in those moments. And what can we do to shore up that feeling and that energy that we may be operating with? And so most people build habits for ideal conditions, while tip of the spear leaders build habits for unpredictable ones. So if your habits are only working when things go well or when you're calm, those aren't habits. Those are preferences. So what are these 5 habits of unshakable people, if you will? The first and the foremost is emotional regulation. Now, this doesn't mean emotional control. There's a portion of it, but it's being able to regulate your emotion, to not suppress what you're feeling, but to process it, because that which you resist persists. That which you avoid only gains traction and steam. And if we pretend that we're not feeling what we're feeling, it's going to grow, and it's going to be like the beach ball that you try and hold underwater. And as soon as you make a movement, boom, it's going to fly up and out of the water. And you're going to say something that you don't want to say, do something that may be out of character. It's going to blow up in a way that you don't want, right? So we got to be able to regulate, and we need daily practices rather than just occasional breakthroughs, right? We talk about some of the most hostile environments that human beings can be a part of. And, I live in the Western world of the United States. So, the Navy SEALs. These are some individuals that are on the edge of what humans experience. Whether you're for it or against it, they are in rugged environments. Their lives are on the line, and they are, at any moment, something catastrophic can happen. So what do they do in those moments? They regulate their emotion when they're getting ready to storm a building, or when they're falling, free falling with a parachute into another person's territory, or it's at night and they hear gunshots and see gunshots in the dark. Those are terrifying moments. How do you regulate your emotion in those moments? Well, they teach breath work, box breathing. If I can breathe and get enough oxygen into my body to slow things down enough for me to not be reactionary, but to be conscious in the decision that I'm making under the most enormous pressure, then I can make better decisions. It won't mean that I'm going to be perfect, but I give myself the best chance to see what the moment needs and to adjust accordingly. Right? So people all over can have an emotional regulation strategy. Breath can be one. Posture can be another. Journaling, therapy, these are all habits. Talking to certain people that you trust. These are habits that help you regulate what you're feeling and make sense of it and utilize it, not to stay stuck in it, not to avoid it, not to put it in the other room, sweep it under the bed. Like, yes, that may be helpful for that moment, but if you keep stacking that, it's going to blow up. Your nervous system's going to take a toll. And again, you may do something that it's not what you want to do, out of character and not something that you're proud of. Right? So question here would be, what emotion do you usually rush past, avoid, pretend isn't there, that later costs you clarity, energy, or productivity? And really begin to pull the layers on that. Emotions are not liabilities. Like, understanding your emotions is what really smart people do. People who don't do that get dictated by their emotions. The people who say, I'm not emotional, are actually probably the most emotional, unaware individuals that actually probably make more decisions on emotion than anything else. The person who can integrate it to understand that there's information in there. And just because I'm acknowledging what I'm feeling doesn't mean I need to do what the feeling may be telling me to do. I can acknowledge that I'm afraid and still do something. I can acknowledge that, I'm feeling lethargic and still go forward with X, Y, or Z. So that's the first habit. And again, as I go through these, some of these you may already be doing, and that's beautiful. And maybe there's an opportunity to refine, to strengthen, to deepen. Great. Or, there may be some that you haven't yet integrated, and that's the opportunity for you to find a rhythm in your day, in your week, in your month to work on these things, because they will support you long term. Number 2 is identity first, right? Before asking, what do I want to do today, this week with my life? First ask, who must I be today? Or who do I want to be in general today, this week, this month, in my life? And the identity precedes the action. So it colors the action as opposed to just taking action, right? If knowing the type of character that I am or the type of person that I want to be allows me a better understanding of what to say yes to, what to say no to, what aligns most with who I believe myself to be or who I am in the process of becoming, that ever unfolding of becoming. When we do this, the habits reinforce the identity, not the outcome. When we anchor to outcomes, always our outcomes become our identity, and we can't control outcomes. We can do our best to try and get it the way that we want to, but sometimes the way that we think it should go and the way it actually is not the same, and it's even better, right? For us to think that we know what's best for us all the time, every time is a control-based way of living, and usually maybe rooted in fear a lot of the time, right? So we want to reinforce the identity, which is something we get to choose. So allowing our habits to come from who we want to be creates a level of unshakability because it's the one thing that we can control. And this is how consistency survives the chaos, right? When that motivation disappears, that fleeting feeling, that identity stays. A good example that I think about here is Sarah Blakely. She, when she was a kid, she told a story about when she would come home from school, her dad would ask her, "So what did you fail at today?" And if Sarah said nothing or didn't have anything to say, he was disappointed. He's like, you didn't stretch, you didn't try something new, you didn't experiment. And over the years, she built an identity of being an experimenter, being someone who can not be, being a student, right? A beginner's mind. And not failing meant not trying. And so as she began to create Spanx and it started to grow and get big, and now it's a $1 billion company, as the media attention was rising, advisors were showing up, pressure to act like a CEO, she kept that ethos the same. She's like, I'm the type of person, my identity is an experimenter. So she deliberately resisted polishing herself too early as, I got to be the CEO that everyone wants me to be. And instead, she honored that characteristic that she refined, right? She stayed personally involved in product testing. She kept asking naive questions in rooms full of experts. She delayed overstructuring the company. She protected curiosity, maybe over credibility at times. And she did this because it was in alignment with who she was, and who she was what built this big empire, right? And she's said publicly that one of her biggest fears was becoming someone that only cared about protecting her reputation instead of her ideas. And so to reinforce the identity of being an experimenter, she tried things before they were ready. She laughed at mistakes instead of hiding them. She treated quote unquote failures as data, not damage, right? And she optimized for learning fast. And all these habits stacked over time, all these action items continue to reinforce, be the experimenter. Yes, you're going to fail, but the failing is not quote unquote a true failure. It's just data. Use the data. Right? And so I think asking ourselves, who do I want to be before what do we want to do, is a healthy and sustainable way of moving in a direction. Number 3, subtraction as a discipline. So this is the less is more idea, right? Fewer inputs, fewer commitments, fewer explanations. In the West, especially in the West, we fall into the more is better. I got to have more. I just got to do more. I got to be more. I got to more, right? Well, chaos thrives in excess, and clarity thrives on removal. I think of Steve Jobs, right? He's very famous for wearing the same thing every day. He removed that decision from his daily list of decisions. Okay, look, if I just put my clothes out and I know what I'm going to wear, that's one less thing that I got to think about, and I'm protecting my cognitive bandwidth so I can put it towards things that actually matter to him. If you're stylish, that might, or you're in fashion, that might be your thing. So for him, that was something he didn't need to think about. So just removing that from his list and automating it or pre-deciding it made him more efficient and or more effective in where he was allocating his attention, right? So there's going to be 1,000 things that come your way that are going to demand your attention. And when we subtract, we say no. we get to the essence of something. We try and simplify the complexity to double down on one or two things that then compound and create geometric growth as opposed to just linear growth. And that, I think, is what the best, in my opinion, and doing research in athletes and business owners and leaders in the past, is they're really great at focus. And focus, as Steve Jobs has said, is saying no. Boundaries. No, I can't go out this weekend. No, I can't do that. No, I'm not going to be a part of that project. No, complete sentence. Protecting that peace, protecting that cognitive bandwidth, because we only have a certain number of energy units each day. And if I keep things that don't need to be in my head, I'm stealing from those really great ideas that need the attention to blossom. And this isn't just in business, this is also in your relationships, right? Subtraction, what am I saying yes to that's taking me away from my family, from a deeper conversation with my partner, from being present with my kids? When we learn to see things like this, right, we create more memorability with smaller things, going deeper into those things and ultimately appreciating them, and also learning better strategies that we can apply to other areas. So whether this is eating the same breakfast every day, or reducing meeting times or days, or simply just saying no to more things, subtraction as a discipline is a huge benefit and habit of unshakable people. Hundreds of people ask, they say yes to one or two, and then they go all in on those things. All right, number 4, standards that don't negotiate with feelings. So this habit is about deciding, like you don't decide daily, you pre-decide, right? So I think of Kobe Bryant here, and in one of his interviews that I heard a while ago, he was talking about when he was training for his summer trainings. After the season ended, he would personally sign a contract that outlined his training schedule, the days, the times, the recovery, the blocks of how he wanted to structure it, and he signed it before the summer started because he knew and didn't want to rely on I'm not feeling it today, or I got to do this, or I got to do that, and that negotiation that can start when you're not in the optimal state to do the thing that you said you would do. And so he knew that and was like, I am going to create a contract and I'm going to honor that. And he did that for a majority of careers, if not his whole career. And I love the idea of pre-deciding, because if I know, regardless of how I feel, this is just what needs to be done, I don't have to think about it anymore. How exhausting is the tennis match of negotiation? Well, maybe I'll do it this and then not that. And then if I do that, then I can do that. And then there's like so many what ifs that can come with that negotiation. But the truth is if like it's a standard, then I got to stand in the standard, right? The standard is what removes the emotional bargaining. And that the chaos all around us is what's testing your standards. Like the wind tests or strengthens the roots of the tree. Right? So standards are promises that you keep when fear shows up. So when we decide in advance of like what showing up means in business and our relationships and the projects that we're on and whatever it is that we're creating a standard around, then we honor that, right? Especially when motivation isn't there. That's why this standard is there, to remind you of the commitment that you made, the promise that you created. And the best in the world at what they do, or just the best, the people that are at their best, have a set of standards that they live by, and they don't waver. And this is what provides like in a bowling analogy, the bumpers, right? Like if the ball hits one of the sides, it just bounces off and keeps it in that course and no deviations. Like it doesn't mean the ball always goes straight. It just means the momentum is moving forward, right? And I think that's the key of standards that don't negotiate with feelings, because our feelings can change from moment to moment, day to day, week to week, right? But our standards don't. Number 5 is recovery as a skill, not a reward. And I operated like this for a long time. I'll rest when it's done, or I'll recover when I get X, Y, and Z. There's this idea that rest needs to be earned, but instead, I think rest needs to be trained. Now, the most dangerous habit that we can get in is chronic output without recovery. No one can sustain that. It is a unsuccessful strategy long term. And a lot of people think very short term nowadays. Instant gratification, only thinking 6 months in the future, not understanding what the compound effect of their decisions will create. And this is why a lot of people are anxious and burnt out. And in a very stressful situation is there's not recovery baked into their daily, weekly flow, right? And I think about someone like Roger Federer, one of the best tennis players to ever play the game, arguably one of the best. He is known for training less than his peers, fewer hours, but in those hours they were more precise, and there was aggressive recovery because he was training to last, to endure, not just to win the season. And how many of us at times, and maybe even for a long time, are only training for the season, not for the lifespan of the career, right? Going back to that short-term, long-term thinking. And so whether it's, scheduling sleep or mobility or play, these things are not leftovers. They're not gifts that you give yourself. They need to be integrated. It is part of the work. It's what allows you to do your work at a higher level for a lot longer, and also infuse more joy, fulfillment, and presence into what you do, right? So to recap, we have emotional regulation, right? Finding something, a simple thing, that helps you regulate the emotion that arises in your day, in your week. Identity first. Who do I want to be before what do I want to do? Number 3, subtraction as a discipline. Less is more, right? Clarity thrives on removal, and chaos thrives on excess. How can we strip it down to its most fundamental essence, its most simplistic expression, which is challenging, but once we're there, you simplify to amplify. And number 4, standards that don't negotiate with feelings. Having those pre-decisions made, those quote-unquote contracts signed before we do something that tell us this is what's going to be done. So we don't have to think about it anymore. We show up and we honor what it was. Number 5, recovery as a skill, not as a reward. Baking it into our daily, weekly rhythm. Otherwise, we won't be playing the game for a long time. We can get injured, we'll get burnt out, we'll be sitting on the bench, and the thing that we're going to want to do is be on the field in the game. Right? So select, kind of going through some action items here. Select one habit that stabilizes you. Maybe you already have it. And again, great. Double down, refine as needed, depending on which season you're in. What's one thing that you can subtract, that you can say no to, that doesn't need to be on your plate, but you're putting it there, maybe because you're activating some people-pleasing tendencies. Maybe it's because you're trying to help someone out, but now it's gone too far. Maybe you just don't feel comfortable with saying no. Like, what's one thing that you can subtract that would give you more bandwidth, more range in your day? Or what's one standard you refuse to negotiate that, if protected daily, would make chaos less dangerous to you, right? These are things that game-changing questions that you can ask yourself to help you stay sustainable and intact. And so I know in these areas, these are things that I think about daily. And the type of individuals that I typically work with are leaders under immense pressure and have lots of responsibility and are back to back in a lot of things. So these are also very much alive in the conversations I'm having with them. And so I know they've been helpful to me to ask and to discover and to integrate, and for the clients that I am fortunate enough and grateful enough to work with. And I know that these will be really helpful for you. So whatever one resonated with you most, I'd say start there and just let that naturally, organically compound over 60, 90, 120 days and continue to layer in while keeping it simple and not starting with too much. All right. I love you guys. Appreciate you. Thank you for being here, and really develop, refine, and strengthen and deepen these habits so that you can remain unshakable in chaos no matter where you go. Much love.